Hello, everyone. We're going to be talking about Claude Monet this morning. Monet was born in 1840, lived 86 years, worked all the way up until the time of his passing. A friend of Monet said, looking at his work, I see excuse me, a tinge of something not real that should be, like that. So he was born in Paris in 1840. The family moved to the Normandy coast, the town of Le Havre, or Le Havre, let's say Normandy. That's where the Seine River from Paris empties into the English Channel there. And they moved there, I think, when he was like age 4 or 5. He studied art in Le Havre and also in Paris. His father wanted him to go into business like he was. He was a merchant, and I'm not sure what kind of merchandise. But anyway, but Monet did the kind of usual, went to school, art school. He became buddies with Renoir, a great impressionist, Alfred Sisley, the great Cézanne, and Camille Pissarro. Would he be the 4 people that he would call his buddies? And point out here that for 20 years, like the other artists we're going to discuss, Cézanne, Monet, Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, it took them 20 years almost before they had any kind of commercial success. So there was a lot of hungry years in there, and no matter what, Monet was going to keep painting. And, you know, underneath it all, it's just this intense love of painting, I want to say, is what kept him going. One of his friends said, Monet is a man of exceptional vision. He sees things differently than most humankind. And as he is sincere, he makes an effort to reproduce what he sees. The poetic quality of his works is very striking. I admire the audacity and sobriety of his treatments. I am often astonished and even shocked by the tonality of a piece. The first impression is strange and unrealistic. To perceive Monsieur Monet's paintings correctly and appreciate their exceptional qualities, one has to go beyond the first impression. Soon the eye grows accustomed and the intellect is awakened, the magic does its work. Monsieur Monet is impressed by nature, and he impresses. And I'm not sure when this critic wrote this, but I'm pretty sure that it was before that the term impressionism was put upon Monet and his peers. But I like that, you know, there's a sincerity. We'll talk about a good painting is in sync with these harmonies of nature. And that this first impression, I mean, 2 points to that. One, the Impressionists are painting different. Monet and his buddies, they're painting different. So the first impression is going to be something strange I've never seen before. But even once you get past that and you understand the Impressionists, or you're comfortable with them, it takes more than that first glance to have it all sink in. So he was first off married to Camille, and they got together in 1867, married in 1870, and she passed away, unfortunately, of an illness. I forget what malady, but it was 1879, and they had 2 children. And from the get-go, his father disapproved of the marriage. And I don't know more of it than that, but he had an aunt that helped support him now and then, I think would throw a little money his way, but got him through some of those lean years. And then after Camille died, he got together with Alice, and they were together for many years, and then they got married in 1892, 1911. She passed away, and she had a family of her own, and this is a photograph of the blended family here. Interesting kind of humorous story about Monet is this is a painting in an area it's outside of Paris where 2 rivers, I forget their name, come together or fork away. And Monet went out there and painted in this area often, and he painted a scene there, and it was fall, and the leaves had fallen off the trees. And so winter came, and he put the painting up, and then he went back outside in the spring to go back to the scene. He looked at the painting. It's like, there's just too much good going on here. I got to finish this. And he gets out there, and all of a sudden he's a little bit late. The buds and the leaves had already started to come on the tree, and it said that he paid the landowner money to go and take those leaves off. And read quite a bit about Monet, and that's one of the very few very extreme acts of behavior that I find in him. So I'm gonna just say he was basically a pretty steady guy. And one of a quotes from him that I really like is he says, "I like to paint as a bird sings." And this is a cropped area of one of his paintings of a kind of like a party scene on the river. And just notice these dabs and dashes and this loose, unfinished, broken color. And I equate that to a piece of sheet music. The notes on there, it's like there's a rhythm going on here. And so when he's painting like a bird sings, I guess is what I want to say. And generally, best I could tell, he was a kind man. The great Cézanne, who we'll be talking about in this series later, he said of Monet, and Cézanne didn't. Cézanne said what he thought. He didn't sugarcoat anything, and he said, speaking of Monet, is the work of a determined man, carefully thought out, trying for the most subtle and elusive effects. And to point out kind of Monet's kindness, Cézanne we'll see, was quite the hermit, and for him to leave his house or leave his area where he painted, or to do anything out of kind of the very ordinary, travel very far, was not something that made him very comfortable. And let's say it's 1880, 1890. I don't know the dates on this when it happened exactly, but Monet was a success now, 20 years into it plus. And he was selling quite well. Cézanne wasn't selling very well. So Monet got one of the top critics of the day, who was one of his friends, to write about Cézanne. He had a show upcoming. Monet says to the critic that, Cézanne's better than I am, and you give him some recognition. So the critic wrote him up. Sales went better than expected for Cézanne that next show. And he was always grateful to Monet for taking that extra effort. And subsequent to that event, just pretty much a few weeks later, Monet invited Cézanne to come up to Giverny, Cézanne being down in Aix in the south of France, to travel to Giverny to hang out with him in Renoir and Sicily, and just kind of have a good time with the fellow painters. And Cézanne did it, and there were bets that Cézanne wouldn't show up, and it's just kind of he so appreciated the extra kindness that Monet showed him that he went way out of his comfort zone to go and be with him and express his gratitude. So let's talk about art history a little bit and where the Impressionists fit in and where Monet fits into that. The way I look at it, to simplify things, there's kind of four major epochs of painting. We start with the primitives, and in this primitive art, just think about it. There's no museums, there's no collectors. It's very pure, and they're doing it for other reasons than money. It's just kind of this innate quality of human nature that wants to express itself, in this creative way. Some Native American work here. And then we get into the Renaissance, and this is kind of a pre-Renaissance painting, classic Renaissance with Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. And another century later or so, we're kind of moving on to a little bit more modern touch to the paintings with Rembrandt and Vermeer here, great Dutch painters. And then, so we've got Primitives, we've got Renaissance, and then we get to this Impressionist period, a very significant period of art, let's say from 1850 until 1950, when abstract expressionism pretty much took over. And here's a beautiful painting of Renoir and Van Gogh, like another generation younger than Monet and Renoir and Cezanne. Then we get Picasso and Matisse kind of taking it to a next level. And then all of a sudden, it's the late 1940s, 1950s. We have Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko. And then in today's very contemporary work, we have somebody like Jeff Koons or Ellsworth Kelly that has this light installation in Austin, Texas. But no matter what, throughout the ages, art has always been something that prompts the human spirit to connect to something pretty cool, let's say. And so the Impressionists, so here they come, 1850-ish, give or take. And that cliche and idea whose time has come, it's like here they are. And it's Paris, 1850 to 1875. The population of the city goes from 1 million to 2 million. It's the center of the arts of the world and has been and will be. And just think of it. Monet goes to art school. Renoir goes to art school. Degas goes to art school. They all want to be painters. And, you've got this booming town that's the center of the art. I just envisioned that it was probably viciously competitive to get to the top of the list, and even if you were talented, you had to put up with some stuff that was probably pretty difficult. So, it's admirable to see these people rise above the fray, I think. And that's what Monet was. That's what he did. And, the way I'm going to break it down is there were basically two Monets in a sense. The first Monet, he was a master with this impressionist kind of look and feel among his peers. And then secondly, and kind of like more importantly, which is going to be characteristic of our other artists, Cezanne, Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, that we'll talk about later, they had this power of perception, this clairvoyance. They could see things that we couldn't see. And, just like Da Vinci, Velasquez, Rembrandt, they painted stuff that had never been seen before. And then we go, aha, I feel it. That's right. I mean, it's like Shakespeare or the Beatles or Beyonce, they come up with something, a new angle on it. And it's just right on with where we are as human beings. And it prompts us to connect in a new way. It gives us a sense of a belonging to something bigger. It gives us an ability to take a look at the world around us, maybe make sense of that, as well as ourselves. So that's art. So let's talk about the Impressionist again, this specific genre of painting. So for almost 20 years, you had Monet, Degas, Renoir, etc., painting their paintings. And there was the Salon Jury, and the Salon was an annual show at the Louvre every year. And this jury of artists, of painters, they determined whether your work was acceptable or not to the show, and hence, if your work was acceptable to the show, among those 2 million Parisians, it's like you were one of the artists. You were considered. You like the mafia, you were a made man, but there was a lot of criticism for many, many years of the Impressionist work, Monet included. And they made comments like, you would think they could draw. And these Impressionist people, so the Louvre would reject them, the Salon show. So they would go have their own show. And for a while, they formed a group called the Society of the Anonymous. And at one of the shows, this painting here of Monet's Impression Sunrise was on display. And the critic in the paper, the number one critic of the day in the paper, said the next day, he said, so it's entitled Impression Sunrise. Well, yes, I'm impressed, about as impressed as when I'm looking at wallpaper in its embryonic state. So that's where the term, where they coined the Impressionist movement, and it was a Monet painting that was the reason that it showed up from this critic's writing. So Renoir, a couple of the artists here. Mary Cassatt. Mary Cassatt was from the United States, and she moved to Paris as a young woman and studied with Degas for many years. Yes, he was her mentor. And whenever they would have one of these shows, the anonymous shows or whatever group they came to, she was on the team. She was one of the respected artists that painted in that manner. And you could say too, or I'll say too, that let's say there were 15 to 20, notable Class A Impressionist painters. Mary Cassatt was one of them. And Camille Pissarro. One thing that distinguished Pissarro from the rest was, I think, he was able to articulate to his fellow artists what it was they were doing. It's like, the artist paints something, it's like, I really like it. And Pissarro would say, well, you just got in touch with this and that, kind of more in abstract terms as opposed to, kind of a linear structure. Well, your red and green is right. There was something about, he knew what was going on inside the artist, kind of what was fueling their spirits, and he knew how to make them stay in touch with that and motivated to keep them going, because the salon jury wasn't going to do it and the public wasn't going to do it. I mean, they were laughed at a lot, but he was like, no, we're doing the right thing. Let's keep going with this, or you have to keep going with it. And a couple of his quotes are, art is a harmony and parallel to nature. We're not painting a figure, we're creating harmonies. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But, the point being is that out in nature, there's certain harmonies that are there, certain energies, and a good painting is somehow, some way, is going to be in touch with that. And that's what we connect with. And that's what, that's that sincere effort of the artist. That's what they're trying to find. They're trying to make something that's in sync and sincere and true. Cezanne, who we'll talk about next, the Cezanne the Great. Degas. This is Edward Manet, not Monet. And until I started studying art history a couple of years ago, I couldn't tell the difference between Manet and Monet. And I still get the names confused a little bit, but like Pissarro, Manet had an extra contribution to the group in that, like Pissarro could motivate them, with their spirits internally. Monet was kind of the number one guy. He believed very strongly in the way they were painting and what it was all about. And he would go to the salon jury, that what they say, they were electrified by his fighting spirit. So for like 20 years of open warfare, they say that he was in the face of those jurors saying no. He was the main proponent of this impressionist art to the outside world, and took a lot of flack for that. And Painting on the Right is one of his classic pieces. Bette Morisset was another one of a female from Paris that was part of the team, just like Mary Cassatt. Van Gogh, that we'll call that, I don't know, neo-impressionist. It's new. It's a kind of another generation later. Seurat, the pointillist, and the stories I read it on Seurat. So Seurat started painting in this, these distinct pointillistic fashion, and he was trying to proclaim to his buddies that this is the way it must be done. Here is the formula for making a great impressionist painting, and I figured it out, and it's my secret, and you're welcome to try it yourself. And there you can see that Cezanne tried pointillism and Monet tried pointillism, and it just didn't work for him. And then it was, again, you come back, there is no formula for a painting. There's something that's true to you that's involved in it, that's kind of bigger than any kind of way to articulate anything. And they finally asked Seurat to just kind of keep quiet with that. So kind of pointing out a difference between a Renaissance painting and an Impressionist painting. Here's this Monet painting here on the left, and that blotchy area that I showed earlier, that was this area cropped. But this is a Poussin painting, I believe from the 1600s. When I go back to the Renaissance, I'm usually, it's, let's say, plus or minus 100 years. But, from a completely different era. And I find it interesting to compare an Impressionist painting with a Renaissance painting. And for me personally, this Monet just feels more alive, more I don't know, more happy, more spirited. And there we could probably come up with a couple of reasons why if you actually believe that. Now, some people will look at the Poussin and just fall over. And if we compared them up close in the museum, they would probably both have a big impact on us. But there's a reason that Impressionism is very popular, even still today. And I think it's there's just a little more life in it, and it's just a little more true to the situation, and we'll discuss why that would be. And I'll put this Monet on the left, Monet on the right, and you'll hear often that and it's pretty true in a way. You see an Impressionist like painting, and you say, well, is that Monet? Is that Renoir? Is that Degas? And it's like it's hard to tell the difference. You've seen them one, you've seen them all. And you could say the same thing about Renaissance work, some Italian painters from 1400 from Venice, and it's like you couldn't tell one from the other. Same thing with abstract expressionism. However, the point here that I want to make is that the more you know about these artists and their work, and the longer you look, you are able to make these distinctions between a Manet and a Monet and a Renoir and a Velasquez and a Da Vinci, etc. And it's a good feeling, and it's kind of worth, in my opinion, it's worth the amount of study to find out the distinction between, because you look at any one of these paintings that you like, and it doesn't matter the artist, but you look at this Manet on the right, you say this one really knocks your socks off. You'll remember that forever, And then when you see another Monet, you'll probably go back to the first time you saw a Monet in your head, and you'll have this wonderful feeling. Same thing with a Monet, But the point being, you gotta study it a little bit and spend a little bit of time with it. And I will say, it has the potential to be quite rewarding. So another thing I want to point out here about the times, like Paris is doubling in size. So think about what you see every day, out in the world, and think about what they saw every day out in the world. And his painting the picture on the left is a sunset in Paris that pretty striking. I was there and caught this photograph just kind of out of the blue. But anyway, there's cars down here. So it's not a recent scene, but the Parisians would have seen this sunset 100 years ago. Here's Monet in his garden. And, not everybody had a garden like that, but the Normandy coast on the left, the French countryside on the right, the Mediterranean that's south of France on the left, and, a wonderful, beautiful, lush estate on the right. And, that's what they were seeing. I mean, they saw, poverty and hard stuff too. But this is what we look at. This is what's in our face a lot. And not only is it outside, but it's on television, etc. Think about when you travel across the country, you're in an airplane or a car. And so your visual experience is much different than if you're, riding a horse and buggy or even a train. So what's new and different with the work of the Impressionists that, separating it from the Renaissance? And I would say one thing first off that I notice is the subject matter changes. There's a lot more pleasantness, I'd say. Well, let's just say this. There's less harshness in what we see in a lot of the Impressionist paintings versus what was in the Renaissance period. And, my thought is too, it's 1425, and there's been a bubonic plague, and, it's like life's pretty rough compared to what it would be in Paris in 1865. I mean, depending on, many other factors, but for the majority of people, life's a little bit easier. And, the French painters at this day, it's like, I'm tired of, dealing in all that negativity. Let's paint something a little bit more gentle. And, that's my thought. And, the expression soften the mind versus sharpen the thinking. And, when there's kind of a harsh, traumatic display in the image, I want to say it wakes you up. It gets you out of your stuff, and it transcends you into a kind of a bigger space. But also for me, there's like an element of fear that I feel, and your mind narrows up a little bit. Whereas, we have this little bit of pleasure over here. It's kind of like, you could narrow your mind on that too much. But at the same time, it's just a little bit more gentle, and it's like a little bit more potential to open the heart and soul. Another big change in the Impressionists, besides the subject matter, is the way they put the paint on, and it's brush strokes particularly. It's like they're very expressive, very loose, very free. And the critics would say, "Well, they're unfinished, and that's loose." Grade school handling, and the forms are too indistinct. How dare you do that? And so here's a wonderful painting on the right. David Tierney, I believe was his name, a Dutch painter. It's from the Flemish painter, Belgium, Dutch, northern France, I guess, and closer to Rembrandt and Vermeer kind of way they painted. And it's from the early 1600s. And then here's Monet's painting from the 1800s. And, what I want to say is, in this painting here on the right, the Dutch painting, the guy had to get this hat right as far as its size versus the eye and the location of the nose and the foot and the shoe. And then, the size of her torso versus this, whatever is hanging on the wall. You have to get all these things right, which is wonderful. It's what you're supposed to do in a sense. But here we have Monet over here on the left. And look at these, these figures here in the back. They're just indistinct, loose, but at the same time, they're expressive. They get the point across. You don't have to be that accurate to make the painting work. And as we get all the way into abstract painting, you see there's no accuracy at all. However, it is accurate to something that's speaking to you inside it, in a different language. And I said that as a bird sings. These dabs and dashes, they look like a lot of fun to me, and there's a rhythm there. Whereas, there's a rhythm here, but it looks like it's kind of very technical and methodical work, where this has just a little bit more freedom and energy to it. So, third item, color. They really pushed the color compared to how the color had been portrayed before. So this is a painting that from 1905 by Andre Derain, a friend of Matisse's. And the color is really amped up here. It's more so than what Monet and Renoir, et cetera, were doing. But I wanted to show the exaggeration. And it's you can like, Derain can credit Monet and Renoir, et cetera, because they took color further. And so Derain said, well, I'm going to take it even further, like Matisse did. And a friend of Monet said of his work, trees in nature are not blue, people are not violet. And your great merit is precisely to have painted them thus as you felt them to be out of your love of beautiful colors. So one of the things about impression that you hear is that it's not paint what you see, but paint what you feel. And, it's like when you get to the colors, it's like, well, that tree has, I don't know, I feel blue, and that person, I feel green. But what the artist has to keep in check, though, is, the feelings, but there has to be some kind of academic, let's call it, underlying structure to it, where this Derain painting, and a little off topic here, in color, and then here it is in black and white. But notice all these variations of gray and the white and the black. And, what I want to say, if you and I were out in nature, I guarantee we would not see this red and this kind of army green over here. And we might see a tinge of red in there, the way the sun is reflecting or something, and we might see a tinge, they would say that's greenish, that's red, but not near to the extent that this painting's going. But what we would see, regardless of whether it was tinging blue or red or green, we would see all these variations, and they call this value, it's value relative to black or white. If it's in the middle, it's in the middle value of gray. If it's really bright, it's close to the value of white. And somebody said once that we don't see so much color when we're outside as we see contrast. And so these contrasts are right on, in a sense, is what I'm saying. And that's one of the reasons the painting works. So more color, more energy, as a bird sings. And this is a Poussin painting. Well, I showed that already. And then, look at Mona Lisa here, and this is another Derain painting, a portrait he painted of Matisse. And look how polished, the polish was essential. And now I forget, there was a Dutch painter named Frans Hal, and it was probably late 1600s. He was the first one to show a brushstroke in a painting, and people were like aghast at that because, some of the theory was you're painting the divine, and if you put the stroke on there, it's like your mark in your hand, and it's like, no, that's too arrogant of you to include yourself in there. You're trying to polish something beautiful with nature, just as the Impressionists were trying to do. They were just starting to do it a little bit differently, and with a little more umph. And I'm like saying that that's what we wanted then. So a big one here, besides color and brush strokes and subject matter, is they started painting outside. The invention of the painting tube was like 1850. And that allowed an artist to take, a dozen tubes of paint and their easel and a palette and go outside and be out there painting nature. And whereas before this laborious task of mixing your paints and getting them ready, and you'd be inside, and maybe you go look outside and paint and you get your inspiration, but most of it was not created outside. Monet created a ton of paintings outside. Cezanne did the same thing. Van Gogh, that's kind of almost all he did. When he wasn't painting a portrait of somebody inside, he was outside painting all day, every day. And anyway, I just have to believe that once they started painting outside, into their consciousness entered this greater sense of space and freedom and movement and talk about harmonies. That the harmonies that you would have in your imagination inside your studio versus the harmonies that you would have outside, it's like, it's got to be a big number. And here on the right is Monet's houseboat, and he would go outside, paint all the time, but he would go out on the river and paint on the houseboat here. So another change here is the patrons of art. And so let's say we have the primitives, and there's no patron in a sense. The patron is the community. It's like the community decides, what's cool and what's not, and what's connecting and what isn't. And that's how that all gets sorted out. But then we have the aristocracy in the church in the, the early days of, the painting that we traditionally call a painting. And, they would say, hey, we want this painted, and here's your compensation. So pretty hard not to turn that down. But then we get into the Impressionist period, and we have this, dust up with the salon guys. So at least the salon is a group of painters. So they got their standards. But, I want to say power corrupts eventually, and, that they were just too rigid with it, but it was out of the hands of a few and into kind of like a more learned hand, which would be an improvement. But then the Impressionists come along, and it's like there's a much greater public art market. I don't know how much that it exploded, but it did exist. It as we'll see with Van Gogh and his brother, it did exist in during these times. People would buy posters and prints, etc. And that's kind of what gave the Impressionists their traction, is is they said no to the salon. They said no to the aristocracy. They said no to the church. We're going to paint what we want to paint. And the Renaissance guys, Da Vinci, they, whoever the power was then, there was, I'm sure, an act of rebellion then, because they found new ways to express the way they wanted to put it down. And again, it's the artist rebel spirit, always kind of pushing the envelope here. Yeah, this is a picture of Woodstock, and I just thought, talking about the people. And then, today we have the Museum of Modern Art and all the money that goes with that. And, there's always an element of corruptness to art, and always that kind of hypocrisy of the artist being free of the power, but then at the same time, it's like, well, I need to eat. So, it's kind of always the way it's been. And then this is a line from Matisse, or some words from Matisse, but basically I'll paraphrase here. He says, in pagan art, the artist is frank with himself, cardinal, natural, his emotion is sincere. There is no ambiguity in the equivocal situation of the Renaissance. Too often the patron's satisfaction guides the artist, and the artist's spirit is thus limited. So the point being, he talks about some of the Renaissance paintings they're just way too much, that they're not just too decorative, they're just too opulent. And it's like, a good artist doesn't want to paint that way. And but if he wanted to survive, he had to do it. So all art, Impressionism, Renaissance art, abstract art, primitive art, it's got to have some of this. And some of this is this kind of primal, carnal, instinctive, intuitive, impulsive, emotional, human spirit. It's got to be in there. And then what also has to be in there is this intense love of painting. And I point this is an Egyptian mural around the BCE, the fall of Pompeii back in those days, or prior to that. And the point was to get one of these murals painted. The point was for the Pharaoh, etc., to have a better afterlife, as I understand it. And the person that painted this, very talented, they probably were going to have a better afterlife too, or going to get paid or something. There was something in it for them. And there's probably, some limitations on what they wanted to create. But what I want to say is what kept that artist going, and what, got him up in the morning, got her up in the morning, was these are wonderful colors. This black and this Venetian red, that you would call it, this kind of ochre, Naples yellow, these marks here, these forms, the composition, the entire image is just a cool image. And the artist that's making this, he's in love with this black and the white relationship. He or she is in love with making all these marks. And so it's this intense love of painting, this common primal instinct that's within us. And, all good art is going to have that in some way or another. And another kind of example here is Victor Hugo. He said, sometimes beauty is more useful than the useful. And so this is a Raphael portrait, again, Renaissance era. And then from maybe 400 or 500 years later, Mark Rothko, abstract painting. And so if I walk into a museum, and what I like to do a lot of times is stand as far away as I can to something that's sort of I would probably stand as far away from this, but I would know it's a portrait still. But even, I could stand far away and it could be a landscape. But anyway, I'd be that far away. But what would strike me, what would like make me want to move closer, is this red and this black and this relationship with the skin tones and where they're located. And it has nothing to do with this, whoever this person is that they're painting. The object is not important to me. What's important to me is the way the paint has been put on. And it's like, so what I'm trying to show you here is this red and black and flesh tone, they get me. And might not get you, but they get me. And here on the right is this Rothko painting. It gets me too. And it's like, well, what's the common thing here? Well, it's the palette. So trying to point out that the paint can be very powerful. So iconic Monet, let's look at some of his very impressionistic paintings that you know, a lot of us have seen for many, many years, and how he makes the connection to us. I put this one in here. This was one of his earlier paintings. I think it's entitled Luncheon on the Grass. Don't quote me. But here we are. I mean, let's say he painted this when he was 25 or 30 years old. Here he is, you know, 75, 80 years old, and he still has the painting here in his studio. And you know, that looks like the Monet painting that I keep showing, but I'm guessing that he saw Monet's painting of people in the boat and he copied it out of appreciation. Let's see, why do I have this? Oh, I was going to say too, you know, when Monet started out, we could look at some of his first paintings when he's 18 or 19. I don't think I have many, but anyway, I just see this painting here on the left being not quite as energetic as this painting here on the right. And energetic doesn't mean it's more lively, or, you know, in a sense of you know, it could be more sensual energy in a sense. It could be soft energy too. It's just got more going to it. So, you know, I want to say he improved over time. His houseboat, there must be the Normandy coast. And the grain stacks, we'll be talking about that, kind of how that sets him apart. A lot of train station pictures. And this is a cropped area of this painting here, this up in here. And just to kind of show, this is like where the rubber meets the road here. This is what you got to do, or Monet did, to get you to see this and feel something cool. So here would be a more typical painting of the day, you know, kind of this almost a photorealism kind of look, but you know, just look at the painting on the right and then look at the Monet painting, and you know, there's a sharpness here to the painting on the right, and you know, that's pretty cool. And the train's coming at you, and this, you know, the cow catcher is pointed and everything. So, you know, there's some energy going there, but you know, this Monet painting, it's like, it's kind of like, it makes you take a deep breath. It's like, I don't know, it's just it's not as shock, doesn't have as much shock to it, but it also has kind of a more expansive, a bigger feeling. And then for you all that say you can't draw, I can't draw, and Jackson Pollock couldn't draw, but my conclusion with him was he didn't like to draw, so he didn't. And if you don't draw well, it's okay. You can still make a great image. And but this is a sketch from Monet's. I saw it in a book with a lot of his sketches, and I couldn't match it up exactly with the painting, and maybe there's not one that exactly matches up. But you know, if you showed this to somebody at the Louvre and the Salon Jury, they just like laugh you out of the room. But you'd say, well, it's a study, and it's you know, I'm trying to find the essence of the situation here. And there's something really cool here. And I would say this drawing does, there is an essence that's captured there, and it's like, you know, that on my wall would be probably pretty cool. Some good snow scenes. This is the Thames River in London. So the water lilies, we'll talk about that. Last 20 of his years of his life, that's what he dedicated himself to. And let's see, another Hugo quote, you know, but that sometimes the not so useful is the most useful in a sense, but greater than the tread of mighty armies, and that idea whose time has come. So that's kind of where this impressionist movement is. You know, it just grabbed a hold and it's still with us. Same thing with the Renaissance, same thing with abstract art today. It's just kind of how it rolls. So we're going to take a break here, and I will come back and talk about what sets Monet apart from his peers and what he gave to the world of art. So see you in a few.